Welcome to the Lessons for Luca podcast. I'm your host, Michael Santi, author of New Man Emerging, transformational trainer and coach, and most importantly, I'm Luca's dad. This episode I want to dedicate to the people that are going through it. I know that there's a lot of people going through a lot right now. And I want to use this episode as a way of laying out a framework and an anatomy of what we could call a spiritual awakening or a revelation or an epiphany, and with the intention that when we put language and we put structure or a framework to something, it can give us a new relationship with what we're going through and ultimately inspire us to keep going. I know, like I said, there's a lot of people going through a lot right now. And to know that there's an anatomy to that journey and to know that you're not alone in that journey, I think can generate a lot of new motivation and new inspiration and new blood to keep fighting to get to the other side of it. And when we look at the anatomy of a spiritual awakening, a lot of that is tied into the hero's story or the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell years ago had coined the phrase the hero's journey, and by putting that framework and anatomy to it, it gives us a new opening, a new potential, and a new possibility to relate with my awareness and my advancement and my evolution and my ascension in a whole different way. Our life has these moments as we go through year after year and decade after decade. We have these growth spurts. When we're young, those growth spurts are visible and obvious. There's a lot of young people, they go to sleep at night, they wake up, they look like they're 2 inches taller because they're changing and growing so fast. But as we get older, those growth spurts tend to be less physical and more emotional and spiritual. And they're not seen, they're not recognizable, and they're certainly not obvious. They're far more internal. And we go through the seasons of our life, and certain seasons of life, they initiate us into a greater version of who we are. The initiation of marriage, it calls forth a whole new part of ourselves that operates from the standpoint of not being selfish, but learning how to play team, how to protect the nucleus of your life. When we get initiated into parenthood, we start to live way beyond what we thought our comfort zone actually was. When our parents are getting older, that initiation of the way we interact with our parents as they have, less energy and less agency as time is going on, they're very different than the parents that we grew up with. And so it's these initiations, these seasons of life, these milestones of life, they call forth a whole new part of us internally, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And to put a framework to that can help us appreciate the very journey that we're on. And so the first phase of that spiritual journey or that spiritual awakening is exactly that. There is some kind of awakening. An awakening is something as life is going on, as my consciousness is expanding, there's a part of my life where it's glaringly obvious. I can't unsee it. I have an awakening. And typically that awakening is through hardship. That someone is close to me dies, or there's something I care about that I lose, a divorce, a health conflict, I lose a job, a career, a relationship, a marriage. Usually it's some kind of hardship, but that hardship wakes me up in such a way that I can't unsee it. I can't go back to sleep. And if we look at, I'll use the story of the Buddha as we go through this framework. The awakening for the Buddha was, if you know the story of the Buddha was that he was born a prince, And his father wanted to shield him from all the hardships of life. And so until around the age of 14, he knows nothing but the fruits of the palace. And one day his chauffeur takes him outside the walls of the palace. And the Buddha sees an old man, he sees sickness, and he sees death. And what happens is he can't unsee it. He can't go back to sleep. He can't go back to the way that he was. That fragmentation was so glaring in his life and in his consciousness and in his psyche that he couldn't go back to an old way. He couldn't go back after that threshold. And that part of us and our spiritual journey, our spiritual evolution and growth is called the awakening. That we have this great awakening or this great epiphany and we can't unsee it. And it's typically not a pleasant awakening. It's typically from a huge challenge, a big loss, a deep pain or wound. And if you think about the moment when you know your marriage isn't going to work, the moment when that person close to you passes away, that career or that endeavor, that thing that you love is no longer available to you. And it creates a threshold that we walk over psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally that we know we can't go back. And that's the first part. That's the awakening. And for the Buddha, that was seeing sickness, old age, and death. The second part of that journey is what's called the Great Departure. Joseph Campbell called this the soul's call to adventure. And if you look at stories in the Bible or Homer's Odyssey, or again, like I'm talking about, the Buddha's journey, there's this great departure, meaning I can't stay here. Sometimes that's physical, like the hero leaves his town and goes on a great walkabout or a pilgrimage or a great journey. But a lot of times that could also be like this marriage, this way of doing things, this career. I've got to leave it. I've got to leave it emotionally. I've got to leave it spiritually, psychologically, sometimes physically. The soul is called to a greater adventure, and that's called the Great Departure. That I actually have to cross that threshold and demonstrate courage and commitment and walk into the unknown. For the Buddha, that was leaving the palace. That was leaving the palace, renouncing his princeship and going and becoming a monk. It's this departure that I go on this pilgrimage. It's, it's Homer's Odyssey that Odysseus has to leave home. It's, Christ's pilgrimage. It's all of these hero journeys. You even think of Luke Skywalker as he has his awakening. He has to leave Tatooine. This is built into all of our hero stories, that we've got to leave and go on this great adventure or this great departure. And sometimes, yes, that is physical. I've got to move from my hometown. I've got to go on this great journey across the country or to another part of the globe. But again, a lot of times it's just psychological, mental, and emotional and spiritual. That we go on we are called to the great adventure. We go on the great departure. And that's the second leg or second part of this anatomy of the spiritual journey. The third part is the tricky part. The third part is that after we have this great awakening, after we go on the great adventure or the great departure, oftentimes we think that this is where life is going to get easy, that this is where, proverbially speaking, like Moses is going to part the Red Sea of my life, and my vision and my purpose and my mission and my destiny is going to become incredibly clear. Yet, what tends to happen is we go into the third leg of their journey, which is called the road of trials. The road of trials is actually when we make that great commitment to the ascension and advancement and evolution of our life, that life actually gives us challenge. And in that challenge, we think, I'm doing something wrong. I'm missing the mark. I'm not getting it. This is too hard. This is where emotionally we want to give up, because life is just getting harder and harder and harder. But without the anatomy of the spiritual journey and the great awakening and the great epiphany and the hero's journey, we would look at the road of trials and say, what is this for? Why keep going? And that might be where you find yourself now, as the world is changing so fast, or your relationship is changing so fast, or you're struggling with this thing over and over and over again, that the road of trials is actually bringing you a contextual field into your life to sharpen and polish a skill set. And so even, again, using the story and the journey of the Buddha this is where he sits and he learns to meditate, and he does it over and over and over again, and his body is being challenged and he's being eaten by the worms and the insects, but he stays on the road of trials. The hero stays on the road of trials. The hero understands that the road of trials is where I become sharper, more skilled, that here is where I'm developing a skill set that no one can ever take away from me. And that doesn't come from ease. That doesn't come from by getting everything that I want and ask for right away. It actually, we develop that through the muscle of earning it, the muscle of staying committed, staying in the storms, moving through them, building the emotional skill set and the resiliency. Because as we build that emotional resiliency, as we stay in the road of trials, as we double down on our commitments, as we polish and sharpen our sword, we move to the next phase, the final phase of the hero's journey, which is the illumination or the enlightenment. That by going through that road of trials, I download not just conceptually, but experientially the skill set that takes me to the next phase of my journey, the next phase of my ascension, the next plateau of my mountain, the next evolution of who I am. And that illumination, that enlightenment for the Buddha, he downloads the Four Noble Truths, or Gandhi brings back the principles of nonviolence. Jesus brings back all the principles of Christianity. The hero brings back all of this experiential knowledge. It's not a concept, it's not a theory, it's experiential. It's now downloaded in the DNA of the hero. And the trick, or let me say the way to solidify the fourth leg of that hero's journey, is that the illumination or the enlightenment becomes solidified when the hero realizes that his skill or her skill, that her journey was really for others. That what I've learned by going through that fire, by being alchemized by the challenge, by staying committed and courageous, that really my value is to come and give it all back to the people that are going through their journey of awakening. And so it's the story of the hero. It's the story of Luke Skywalker becoming a Jedi by then being of service, by living my life as a contribution. The context of the hero is to contribute to others. The context of the hero or the heroine is to now what I've learned, go and give it all back. Give it back to the children, to the next generation, to the people that are struggling, to the people that feel lost, that the people who are confused, and you go and you give it all back. That's what solidifies the fourth leg of that journey, which is the illumination or the enlightenment. Joseph Campbell talks about on that journey, on that hero's journey, inevitably you meet the mentor. Well, the mentor is simply the hero that went all the way and turned around and now is coming back and giving you what they learned, so that your journey can be a little easier, a little more shaped, a little more inspired to keep going. And so the intention of this episode is that if you find yourself struggling, if you find yourself at the beginning of your awakening, if you find yourself that your soul is called to a greater adventure, if you find yourself in the road of trials, keep going. Don't give up. In in addiction, the awakening is really rock bottom. And that rock bottom serves a purpose. There's enough pain that I can't unsee or undo the way that what I've now seen or the way that I've been living. Great. Follow that call to adventure. Whether that's sobriety or a healthy relationship or a new commitment of greater value, follow it. Keep going. Don't give up. Because you're not broken. You're simply being initiated. You're following that soul's call to a venture, to ascension, to evolution, and there's a greater version of you that's on the other side of it. So don't give up. Keep going. And when you get to the end, turn around and give it back to the people behind you. As always, it's an honor to be on this journey with you. And until we meet again, be a good man, live a good life, and determine each of those for yourself.